I'm John Wilson, and this is propertyinvestmentblueprint.com. And today I'm excited to welcome one of the rising stars of UK property investing, Iain English. Iain has built a very successful business in a relatively short time based around the multi-let and rent-to-rent strategies. Now, Iain came onto my radar a few months ago when I heard an interview that he'd done with Your Property Network magazine, and I was impressed by his value of attention to detail and his strong business sense, and we also seem to share a love of putting systems into property businesses. I checked out his website and I was impressed by his sort of strong branding ethic that he had there as well. So without further ado, welcome to the broadcast, Iain.
That was a really nice introduction, John. Thank you for that.
No worries at all. So yeah, I just want to, just for the benefit of our listeners, talk a little bit about how you got started. I know it was
Sure.
a slightly unconventional way.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say, actually. Yeah, I guess they say necessity is the mother of invention, and I had a fairly catastrophic business collapse that left me with just over £150,000 worth of debt. I still had a mortgage to pay on my own property. My son was living with me, and I would probably consider myself unemployable, having always run my own companies. And, I was really looking at a bit of a dark future at that point in time, and rented a room out in our property, which is, I'm based down in Tunbridge Wells. And, at first I really didn't think too much of it. Thought the 350 quid would probably be helpful, but wasn't going to change much. But I then let out another room in the house and realised that it was starting to make a bit of a difference, and kind of went from there, really. And we now have 5 people, lodgers, staying with us. But it showed me how quickly things could be turned around, and of course the cash flow was the bit that was my mercy, and it led me very quickly to start looking at how I could use the same sort of technique to really generate a good future for myself, which is really the next chapter in the story.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I often recommend to people when they ask me how they can get started in property, that a nice easy way to do it is if you've got a spare room, then maybe try and rent that out and just start easy with an asset that you already have to make use of that. So that's great. Now, just to give people an idea of what a typical sort of rent-to-rent type deal works, could you maybe talk us through one that you've done?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing to say is that probably the biggest challenge to actually getting a first deal is gaining the confidence of a property owner, and that's where I think a lot of people certainly see there to be quite a challenge. Once, and of course your first deal is always going to be your most difficult one. But here in Tunbridge Wells, because the rental market is pretty hot, we don't have landlords who are struggling to let their rooms, or rather their properties. So it does take a bit to get that first property on board. Once you've got it, here, for instance, we're paying full market rent. We're not getting any kind of discount at all. And in fact, I will pay more than the market rent in some cases if I'm particularly keen to get it. But not wanting to over-egg it, what I wanted to share with you the kind of deal that is on the lower end of what we can do, and then once you get started, then, I'm an avid fan of Rightmove and looking at floor plans and getting the information. And sometimes, you just get a property that pops up and it can be really quite a lot more attractive. But just to, keep a level head on things, a really typical kind of deal would be a 3-bedroom house, which it would be on the market for £1,000, something like that in Tunbridge Wells. Now, we would convert one of the reception rooms into a bedroom so that we've then got 4 lettable rooms. Bills, we would normally expect to be in the region of £360 a month, but just to make the maths easy, if we say 400 quid, then you've got £1,400 worth of costs to cover. But typically, we would rent a room out, including all the bills, at something in the region of £500 a month. So with 4 rooms there, you're going to bring in £2,000. So you've got immediately a positive cash flow of £600 a month, so long as all the rooms are let, of course. And that equates to £150 per month per room, which is really kind of the bottom end of what we go for. Having said that, the last house we did, it's got 4 rooms, and we're looking at £225 per month per room. So, it really can be, quite a lot more attractive sometimes, but not always. So, it's worthwhile sort of looking at the slightly not so glorious picture, and then if it works with that, then it's just extra.
That's fantastic. I mean, these are pretty awesome figures. In a lot of cases, depending where you're investing, to get £600 a month cash flow doing traditional buy-to-let, depending on what area of the country you're in, it could take you 2 or maybe 3 properties to get to that level. And obviously, in this case, you've had to get 0 mortgages to do it, so that's fantastic.
I think one thing that's worth mentioning is that, and I think it's something you picked up from the YPN interview, is that, while I wouldn't say that we're top end by any means, we do kind of have a standard where, we've got new furniture that's well kept. We'll spend a bit on decorating, a little bit of refurbishment, sometimes even replacing the carpets. So it's not necessarily stuff that can be, taken away with us when we come to the end of an agreement. And the main reason for that is that then, you've got 4 rooms or sometimes 5 that you can let out. And by spending a bit of money up front, you can month on month get more money per room. So that helps to get those numbers up a little bit. So as well as the monthly sort of cash flow, it's also interesting just to point out that from the investment and cash flow point of view, we would normally spend about £500 per bedroom plus another £500 for the kitchen, the hoover, the ironing board, and all the other bits and bobs. And then £1,000, let's say, for some carpet or vinyl in the kitchen and bathroom, other bits and bobs that the property needs. So we're looking at a £3,500 injection of capital into a project. But the great thing is that the way we structure it is we don't take deposits, we take 2 months in advance. And that means that we call it first and last month. So when a tenant gives us notice, they simply don't pay us the last month, and that means that they can save it ready for the next deposit, which is a real bonus for a lot of tenants. For us, it works particularly well from a cash flow point of view because we then don't have to put that away in a deposit scheme. It means that we've actually got it in the business. So although we've spent £3,500 getting the property furnished and lightly refurbed, in month 1 we're collecting 2 months in advance, so which is £4,000, paying £1,000 to landlords. So we've got £3,000 comes straight back in. And we market the rooms just as soon as we can, sometimes using examples of other properties, if in the very early days, just to gain interest, start talking to people. So we're very proactive in marketing it. And so it means that, we've got £3,000 back in month 1. Month 2, as we've said, we're looking at a £600 cash flow. So by the end of month 2, this scenario, you've actually got the money you've spent coming back. And it's in the bank and, available to start working for you again.
Yeah, that's super. That's super. I love the deposits idea there. I don't know about you, but I've certainly had tenants in the past who have just not paid their last month's rent anyway, as opposed to getting the deposit back. So
yes,
yeah,
I think that's exactly it. It's the way we go about it is just to be practical. There's a lot of people we give that we give rooms to, or that become our tenants. They're people who have struggled with letting agents to get places. That might be because they've moved from into the UK from another country, or for one reason or another they've got a bit of bad credit. And for us, that really doesn't make much difference. We don't really need a deposit from them because they're only renting a room. If there's a bit of damage to the kitchen or stairwell, well, that's just something we have to wear, and we build in a £650 a year budget for that. So we're never looking to recoup that from an individual tenant. So it's only ever going to be their room that gets any damage done to it. And so really the liability for us is loss of rent. So it makes a lot more sense for us to have 2 months' rent. It genuinely is a rent advance because that is what gives us security. It's not trying to dodge the system and use it as a deposit. And in fact, if there is damage to the room, what we do when we take somebody on is we give them a breakdown of the charges that we will be making if we need to clean the carpets, paint the room, clean the room, that type of thing. And, if we do need to do that, we'll let them know once they've given us their notice. And, they've already agreed it. We've already told them. So it's no surprise. And we find that people, by and large, behave quite honourably with that. And we just get them to sign that they're happy for us either to take it from their rent advance, or they can simply pay it to us in the month while they're still there on their notice.
Yeah, no, sounds good. Sounds like a good way of reducing the admin as well, and I'm certainly all for that.
So it's a win, which is always, of course, the best way to be doing business where you can.
Absolutely. Okay, so for anyone who's listening to this thinking that this sounds like a pretty cool way of investing, be they newbies or experienced investors, what do you think are the advantages of this type of investing, and what they need to be thinking about if they want to get into it?
Well, blatantly the cash flow. I've had quite seasoned investors who have got quite extensive portfolios very interested to talk to me about how we do it, because at the end of the day, cash flow is what every business needs, and most businesses that go out of business, it's actually because of cash flow rather than because they don't have orders and that they're not profitable. So really, it's the cash flow that helps, and it just helps with any situation. So for someone who's already got property, it just helps increase the income that they're getting from the property which they're managing. For someone who is looking to get out maybe of a full-time job, it's great because it's a relatively quick way of generating money so that you can actually, financially move yourself away from other activities or types of employment that you're not really keen to pursue. So that's the main advantage. I'm also keen, you do sometimes hear on the circuit of, big numbers and people telling you how easy things are. And while I'd say it's not complex, and clearly everything's simple when you know how, there are some challenges to this particular way of managing property, and it's not always for everyone, actually. I mean, I've talked to people, I've put people off doing it if they don't seem to be the kind of character who likes to deal with people, because, property, obviously it is a people business, but multi-letting, I can assure you, is definitely a people business. And it's as well to keep the properties near to where you live, keep them in a fairly tight radius, and you need to keep an eye on people. And, you build the relationships, but you also build a relationship which is one where it's quite clear who's in control, because otherwise, you do get people taking advantage and, causing some problems sometimes. So I'd say those are the challenges. But having said that, it goes in waves, and, sometimes we have a few months, and I have to pinch myself because, I haven't heard from a tenant for ages, and I'm thinking this is as much work as a single let, and I probably shouldn't think those thoughts, because, of course, then the next month, 2 fridges will break, 3 washing machines will be going funny, and 4 people have decided that they want to move rooms. So it goes in waves.
Yeah, sure. Like any property business, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, I hate to bring this up, Ian, but for anyone who spends amount of time online, they will have seen maybe one or two negative comments about rent to rent recently. For example, I read one blogger who will remain nameless call rent to rent the latest passive income property scam. So,
Right.
I mean, what do you say to people like that who are quick to criticise anything that falls outside their narrow view of what property investment should be?
Yeah, well, there's a few things to say, really. I mean, I think it's probably true, just sort of starting from the point of HMOs in general. I think there's plenty of people who would frown on HMOs, and that would probably be because there have in the past been some fairly horrible examples of how fairly ruthless people have managed properties, and done it by breaking the law and really just to sort of feather their own nest, without a lot of concern for the health and safety of their own properties and the individuals living in it. If you then combine with that rent to rent is an attractive property strategy for people who aren't necessarily that experienced in property, then of course it's a mix where things can go a bit awry. And also, sometimes you might be attracting people who really are behaving in a way that's not very professional, and that of course then becomes the tar brush that can be used for anybody who's following that strategy. In addition to that, I'd also say that rent to rent, it's not exactly sort of a brand new creation. This type of thing has, it's always gone on. And if you look sort of into Central Europe, it's very usual for people to be sharing, rooms within a property and the utilities there. So it's by no means anything new. But the particular structure where you are renting and guaranteeing the rent from a property owner and then subletting, the fact that structure isn't the everyday norm, and that insurance policies are not set up particularly to sort of to accommodate that, that lenders are not particularly, they're not particularly keen on it, and it's all because it's just not the typical way in which things are done. It's not because inherently it should be avoided. I think, as with any kind of business, if you're dealing with somebody who's professional, who's got something to lose, if you like, who's got a reputation that they're growing and building, then they're going to be a much better bet. And it doesn't matter what type of property management you're looking at or what type of business you're looking at. If those values aren't there with the business and the individuals you're doing business with, then you're much more likely to run into issues. But I find it interesting. Just a case as an example is, if we look back, I think it's sort of in the late 80s, when there were a lot of people who weren't in the commercial line of financing. So if they wanted to buy a second property and let it out to a family, they were really breaking the terms of their mortgage by doing that, but they didn't really have much of a choice. So, landlords got together and said to the lenders, we're not comfortable with what we're doing, but we kind of don't have much choice. And they had enough influence on the lenders to actually encourage them to re-look at things, assess what the risks were, and bring out a bit of a hybrid product in the form of a buy-to-let mortgage. Now, we've actually spoken to a couple of banks, and they have actually expressed an interest in this means of managing properties, and I think we could see something coming out to reflect what's going on in the marketplace, which will, I think, change that dynamic, and will be more practical in how it's looking at what's going on in the UK at the moment. And of course, the ongoing need for low-cost housing is not going to go away.
Yeah, that's some very good points you raised there, Ian. And you're right. It's the way the market is going. You know that there's far more single people looking for accommodation these days because divorce rates are going up and all the other sort of stats. So yeah, it's really just reflecting the needs of the market really.
But I mean, as well as with the credit crunch and the squeeze on people's wages, and like you say, there's an awful lot of breakups of families. So it's not just young professionals who we're seeing coming along looking for rooms. But there's been a really big difference in the rise in demand for housing and the rise in the supply of housing, and the disparity between the two has been going on for such a long time now that the gap is massive, and it's a gap that needs to be filled somehow, and it's not going to be filled by enough new buildings being put up in the short term at all. I mean, I'm quite keen to tell you a little bit about a venture that I'm very pleased to announce, which is that I've embarked upon the development of a franchise model for this, because we're so confident that this is something which is here to stay and which needs to mature a little bit. And so what we've done, I've got a business partner who was director of one of the best-known high street property management franchises, and we've developed our own franchise, which is Good Value Rooms. Soft launching at the moment, but watch the space because we are going to be marketing it more widely towards the end of this year. And the reason for that is that we're so convinced that as a means of managing property, this has got such a lot to offer for all of the people involved that it provides a very strong business case for taking it seriously and really raising the profile, raising the bar in terms of quality and standards. And that's all the things that are wrapped up within the franchise model. And of course, to reduce the risks that there are to all parties involved, such as landlords who, clearly have been burned by unscrupulous operators. So it's a really great project that we're working on at the moment, and it's going very well. It's generating a lot of interest, and when you talk to property owners, an awful lot of them are really bringing in very little money each month from their property, like you mentioned earlier. With this type of business where they're able to get a bit more each month, and they're getting a lot more service, a lot less hassle. We can manage a property for a landlord, and they really don't have to get involved because our whole aim is to make it easy for them. It's good business for us, so we want to make it good for them. And in the same way for our tenants, we put cleaners in, we wash the windows twice a year. We kind of, we look after the garden. I mean, we give them a bit extra. They've got their broadband, everything's on one bill. The shed areas are cleaned for them. And it makes for easy living. And I think easy actually is quite valuable these days, as well as, of course, of, the actual financial saving. But it's a combination. And the strength of the business model, I think, is that everybody involved, including ourselves, of course, but more importantly, the tenants, because they are ultimately the ones who are paying. And then, of course, the property owners themselves, the landlords, can really significantly improve the money that they're getting each themselves without having any of the hassles that come along, or the management issues that come along with the multi-let. So I think it's it's got a lot of benefit.
Yeah, no, that sounds pretty exciting, Ian. It's certainly it sounds like a pretty unique franchise. I've not heard of anything like that before. Tell me, will there be opportunities for people to sort of get in, and learn about your strategies, without having to get into the franchise, or maybe?
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, we're in the process of developing a DVD set, which is the sort of the nuts and bolts, the details of how to make this thing work without having to make some of the mistakes that we made, to be honest, or and just to put them all there in one place so that other people can try it themselves. Possibly just rent 2 or 3 properties just to help increase the amount that they're making each month, which, can be enough to make a big difference for, some people.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure I'm certainly very keen to know more about all of this, and we'll perhaps talk again to let people know how this progresses a bit further down the line. But for now, thank you very much for talking to us, Iain, and that's it for now.
All right. Thank you, John.
Visit propertyinvestmentblueprint.com now for free ebooks, videos and tools.